Well, every few years, Texas Monthly Magazine produces a list of the best barbecue restaurants in the state of Texas, which are thereby the best barbecue restaurants on the entire planet. And I remember when I was a kid, there was one particular place that was always near the top of the list. It was the City Market in Luling, Texas. A lot of little towns in Texas have city markets, but City Market in Luling, Texas had perfected the art of barbecue. And they were serious. It was so good that when you showed up there, there'd be a line around the building, and as you walked in, you would lead to the back, and you would actually walk into the smoker where meat was being smoked. And if you were a rookie, you'd leave the door open, and they would yell at you, "What's the matter with you? This is making magic back here. Shut the door." You'd shut the door behind you, locking in that smoke. You would pay cash for your brisket, and then you would walk out and have your life changed. And that was the way it worked. It was so good that when I was a college minister in College Station, Texas, I found out that one of our volunteers was from Luling, Texas, and I just handed her cash, and I said, "Every time you go home to see your parents, come back with brisket from that magical place, okay? And you just let me know when the funds are running low, I'll replenish it, but don't come back here without barbecue." And she faithfully did it. God bless that young woman. It was so good that I remember there was a buddy of mine that started telling me about some non-such ridiculous barbecue that was good. He was talking nonsense, and I told him it doesn't compare to Luling, and he just kept spouting ignorance. And I said, "I have got some in my fridge. I will microwave it, and you try it." And he was talking a big game, massive ego, took one bite, and instantly repented, and looked at his wife and was like, "You're not gonna believe this." And it was amazing. It was that good. So you can imagine how excited Houstonians were when they saw a sign going up at a restaurant that said Luling City Market. And they thought, wow, the people of Luling are expanding. They're coming to Houston. This is amazing. But then I'm sure their joy turned to fear and sadness as they walked in and saw, wait a minute, something doesn't seem right. There's no smoker you enter. There's just barbecue sitting in pans being heated by like a steamer. And it's wet and soggy, and something is very, very wrong. And what you found out was the City Market in Luling, its name was City Market, but there were some investors who realized the name Luling City Market wasn't trademarked. So they took the name and put it on their shop, even though they have no idea how to make barbecue. Right? And so here you had one that looked the same on the outside, but slowly people figured out, wait a minute, this is coming from different people. How did they find it out? They didn't have to research upstream to see who the owner was. It became obvious. Why? Because as Jesus said, "You shall know them by their brisket," right? He said fruit, but it's the same idea, right? That we will know what you are when we see what you make, when we see what comes forth from your life, right? Now, why mention that? Because that's where we are in 1 John. John has been writing to these beloved churches that he loves, and there were people that had put their faith in Jesus, were walking with him, and then a group had left them and started a rival faction that was trying to change the message of Jesus and saying, hey, we got the inside track on God, you don't, and it was muddy and confusing. And so in the midst of that, John is trying to find them some clarity, and he uses some stark contrast throughout the book. Christ, Antichrist. Those who are righteous, those who are unrighteous. And in our passage, children of God, children of the devil. And he's trying to show you there's two different camps, there's two streams. And you will know which one you're in when you see what they produce. And so if you look at our passage, and I'm gonna try to write on it today, we'll see if I can do this right, Lord help us. It starts in verse 10. Notice he says, by this it is evident who are the children of God. He says there's something we can see that when we see it, it gives us evidence of what family you're from. And then he goes over and says, by this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Says there's two different camps here. And there's something we can see in their lives, something they produce that makes it obvious, clear, plain to all what family they are in. And so this is not how you enter into those families, it's evidence that you are in those families, right? It's like my children. They don't work to become my kids. They look like me because they are my kids. And he says, in humanity, there's just two streams, the children of God and the children of the devil. Now, I broke it up this way because I actually didn't rearrange the verses at all. I wanted you to see the way John argues. He just kind of goes from one side to the other. And so this is how the text progresses. And so sometimes you can get lost in his arguments, but he's really just going back and forth. This is the evidence of the children of God. This is the evidence of the children of the devil, and on he goes. I just want to take them one at a time because you can see them in these columns, and I want to look at the attributes of each family, and then we'll look at the application for us, for our family. But before we look at the attributes, some of you are going, oh, okay, yeah, but I'm married to that. Show me the evidence of who's in the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Yeah, I'd like to know what the evidence is. Others of you are going, wait a minute. Children of God and children of the devil? What? Where did these categories come from? You just bifurcate humanity in these two groups? Kids of the devil? Like, what are you talking about? What did I just walk into? Who agreed to these categories? Where is John getting this? And this is what takes us back to Genesis. What you realize is John is not being novel here. John, last week and this week, has been sampling heavily from Genesis chapters 2, 3, and 4, the first book in our Bible. And if we can understand what's happening there, we'll understand what's happening here, right? So we'll go back to Genesis and then come back to 1 John. It'll make a lot more sense. So if you look at Genesis was written down by Moses. Do you remember Moses? God used to let my people go, set them free from Egypt and walk them to the promised land. And as he led these people out of slavery into the land of promise, he wrote down these words given to him by God and really was rebooting everybody's thinking on what it is to be a human being and what it is to walk on the world God made. And so in Genesis chapter 1, he doesn't start with a list of rules. He starts by introducing God. And in Genesis chapter 1, he says, let me tell you what God's like. See his power and his beauty and his love when he spins creation into existence. You can see what he's like through what he has made. And then in Genesis chapter 2, he talks about humanity. Genesis chapter 1 is about the glory of God. Genesis 2 is about the glory of humanity, that men and women are made in God's image. And the first full day of the man and woman was the day of Sabbath rest. Our number one priority was to enjoy God as we enjoy the world he made. And then God made Adam and Eve for one another, that we are meant to love God and love one another. That's the idea of what a human being is for. And yet you see in that place, God gave his people two trees in the middle of the garden. And in the first one, he says, hey, this is the tree of life. That Adam and Eve did not have eternal life within themselves. They were not immortal. But he said, if you come to this tree, by faith, I need to be nourished by something external from me that will give me life. If you come to the tree of life, I will feed you and give you life, right? I come by faith. Or he said, there's another tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's not just awareness that those categories exist. It's a tree that says, I get to decide what's good or evil. You're not in charge, I am. And God said, don't do this. You trust me. If you try to go your own way, make up your own way to live in the world I made, you will be like a branch sawed off from a tree. It'll look like freedom, but you've cut yourself off from the source of life. And then in Genesis chapter 3, there's a viable temptation. The devil, and we won't go into great detail about who he is. We talked about him last week. The devil comes and he gives them a temptation. And the basic message of the devil is to attack the character of God. You can't trust him, Eve. He won't provide for you. He won't look out for you. He will cheat you. If you do things his way, you will lose. Eve, you gotta go for yours. You gotta get what belongs to you. You're in charge, you decide. And Adam and Eve went on that path. They put their faith in the devil, and when they put their faith in him, they were born again. Romans says it this way, their foolish hearts went dark. Something broke in them, and that brokenness has flowed downstream to all of us. There's something wrong with us. And yet with the stain of their sin still on them, God said in Genesis 3:15, his solution, he says, I will put enmity, that is hatred, between the serpent and the woman. And he said, and between your offspring and her offspring. So God says, I'm gonna put hatred between the serpent that deceived them and the woman, and then between the woman's seed or offspring and the serpent's seed and offspring. So now we got two sets of kids. And then he calls the woman's seed he, a singular male pronoun. He will crush your head. He's gonna go up a level and crush the head of the serpent, the one who deceived us, while you bruise his heel. And so his solution to our sin is a savior. A seed of a woman will come to crush the one who deceived us. But he presents these ideas of there will be seed of the woman and seed of the serpent. And you go, what does that mean? And then the very next chapter, Eve has two boys. And what's interesting about Genesis chapter 4 is a lot of times people tell the story of Cain and Abel, and maybe you've thought it was just a morality play. And as a morality play, it's kind of weird. So Cain killed his brother Abel, And the moral of the story is don't kill your brother or else God won't let you farm. Apparently that was really meaningful to them back then. And you're like, the Bible's so weird. But that's not really what's going on. How many kids did Adam and Eve have? At least 7. You find out in the book, you got Adam, Eve, Seth, and then it says other sons and other daughters. They had all kinds of kids. We don't even know most of their names. Why? Because it doesn't matter. It's not part of the story. I mean, they matter. Everyone matters. But I'm just saying that we're not just giving you a record of all the children. He's saying, let me show you the 2 that are indicative of 2 streams. Let me show you Cain and let me show you Abel, which is interestingly what John does. If you've been following where we've been in John, he says, there is God, there's the devil. There's the righteous, there's the unrighteous. There's the children of God, there's the children of the devil. They look like Cain. And you see it in our passage. He's just been following what God said. And so we'll just go down the bad column. Who are the children of the devil? Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. We should not be like Cain, right? So he's moving down the line. So let's look at this Genesis passage, then we'll get back into this one. What did Cain do? Well, interestingly, in chapter 4, verse 3, it says, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. First thing we learn about both of these boys is they're both participating in the religious practices of the day. They both bring offerings to the Lord. They're both in church. That Cain brings an offering. So what's indicative of this 2 streams? It's not, well, the good ones go to church and the bad ones don't. There are children of the serpent in here right now. And you go, he is still even participating in the worship of that day. And so showing up at church doesn't make you a child of God, Billy Graham used to say, any more than showing up in a garage makes you a car. And so what's the difference? Well, they both come and offer, but the passage said God had regard for Abel's offering, but not for Cain's. And the question is, why? And you go, maybe it's content. Abel brought of the flock, and so he sacrificed an animal, which looks closer to God's sacrifice in Genesis chapter 3. Cain brought some fruit. Is that it? It's a quality thing? Like God's like, what are you bringing me salad? Get this out of here. What's the matter with you? Like God doesn't like field greens? It could be that. Or it could be, you look through the rest of the Old Testament, God accepts grain and fruit sacrifice. So I don't know if it's the content. What's interesting is the boys have paralleled up into this point, and then when it gets to their sacrifice, Abel gets 2 qualifying phrases that Cain does not. That his offering, he gave of his firstlings and of their fat portions. Fat portions was the best. So you go, maybe it's a quality thing. God likes nice stuff. But it's that of the firstlings, I think, that really tips you off. If you give of your firstlings, you're not guaranteed secondlings. And so what's it called when you say, hey, this thing that's providing life, this thing that provides food and shelter, my clothing and what I eat, this thing that provides for me life, I'm offering to you because you provided these things. So I'm acknowledging it's not just my stuff that gives me life. You are the author of life who gave me this stuff. I'm acknowledging it and I'm putting the very first and very best in your hands. What's that called? The Bible has a name for it. Hebrews chapter 11 says it this way. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous. God commended him by accepting his gifts, and through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. What's the difference? One trusts God, one does not. It's faith, and the substance of the sacrifice just revealed the heart, right? That's what happened. So Pastor Lou used to tell this illustration, and I didn't bring any, but you'll have to imagine. I remember he went into a group of kids and he brought some Valentine's cards. And he said, ladies, what Valentine card would you like to get? And he had one that was just like terrible clip art and a really just groany poem. And he read it and like, who wants this card? No one raised their hand. People were like, no, get that mess out of here. So then he grabbed another, obviously store-bought card, a little bit better art, a nice poem, but it's still like a store-bought. He's like, if your man gave you this, would you be happy? And people are like, And he's like, if this is the best he could, if he spent hours looking for it, if he really was like, that poem really encapsulates my thinking, would you accept it? And they kind of said yes. But then he presented a card that was clearly handmade. Construction paper, glue sticks, someone colored, you're the best. He said, what about this card? Cheers from the crowd. Because It was a quality. It took time. It took effort. He cut out paper. That shows me he cares. And then Louis goes, what if he just can't do this? What if he just can't? Like the glue stick confuses him, scissors scare him. He just can't do it. But you knew this card was coming from his heart. Would you accept it? Applause from the crowd. We would accept it. We would accept it if it came with sincerity. Okay. Would you accept this card with someone else's words if you knew he was giving this handmade card to another girl? Ooh, yeah. I mean, it was like that room was ready to riot. Like, how dare you? It's hypothetical, but you get the point. Don't bring me this mess of somebody else's words when the real words of your heart are going to something else. You think you're more righteous than God? God's looking at Abel and going, Abel, what are you doing? You're bringing me some leftovers, whatever, but I don't have your heart. You're throwing some fruit at me like you're doing me a favor. That's not what I want from you. Don't sing me a couple songs somebody else wrote and I don't have your heart. It's not what I'm looking for. And so God comes and says, man, I want is faith. I want you to trust me, right? And so the Lord asks him a question. God holds the first counseling session. Verse 6, the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face fallen? God's not surprised, by the way. God's not like, what? Why are you angry? God's trying to get Cain to understand, Cain, why does this make you angry? I created the ground that produces fruit. Why does offering it to me offend you? Why does you releasing the grip on your stuff make you angry? Cain, why are you angry? Why your face fallen? He's trying to ask Cain, what about submitting to me offends you? Why does that bother you? To say you need to trust me, right? And then he offers him a warning. If you do well, will not you be accepted? Do well means to just acclimate to reality. I made all this, trust me. Trust me and I'll take care of you. If you do what's right, it'll lift your face up, Cain. Like you'll be happy. This is a good way to live life. But then he warns him. But if you don't do well, there's only two options here, Cain. There's only two roads. Sin is crouching at your door and its desire is for you and you must master it. If you don't trust me, sin says, go for yours. You do what's yours. You get yours. And he said, Cain, it's like an animal waiting at the door to devour you. That kind of selfishness will not lead to life. It will eat you alive. It's like having a pet lion. You think you're playing with it, it's playing with you. And at the end of the day, this kind of selfish thinking is destructive, Cain. Right? And so God lays out a choice, same choice Bob Dylan did. You're gonna serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're gonna serve somebody. Cain tells his brother Abel about it in verse 8. And then when they're in the field, he rose up against his brother Abel and he killed him. Cain fails at the altar, and so he fails in the field. If I put me above God, it's real easy to put me above you. If I don't care about him, I don't care about you. And you see, the righteousness of his goody two-shoes brother offends him. How dare you say I'm not right by doing things my way? And he murders his brother. God comes to him, says, where's Abel, your brother? God's not lost Abel. He wants Cain to be honest about his sin. And what does Cain say? I don't know. What's that called, class? It's a lie. And then he says, am I my brother's keeper? His brother was a keeper of the flock. He mocks his dead brother. Am I his shepherd? And God says, your brother's blood's crying out to the ground because of you. And so God doesn't kill him. God says, I'm just gonna not let you till the ground anymore. I'm gonna make you wander. That's a gracious punishment. And Cain doesn't go, that's fair. I murdered him. You're gonna keep me alive. Thank you for your grace. What does he say? Your punishment is too great to bear. He accuses God of injustice. How dare you judge me? Your judgments are too hard. You're too judgmental, God, right? He's unrepentant in his selfishness, right? And God tells him to wander and he builds a city. Unrepentant man. And then, we're almost done, Genesis breaks into a genealogy. It's the part you usually skip. Why is it there? It goes 7 generations down from Cain. 7's the number of completion. Let me show you where this stream is going. And you get Lamech, that means conqueror. And the first thing we learn about Lamech is he takes 2 wives. I don't care about your feelings. I don't care about your heart. I want to use you for me. Your disadvantage, my advantage. And then he says, there was a young man who wounded me, so I killed him, right? You see arrogance and violence. I will take what I want. I'll go for mine. I don't care about you. When you see the proliferation of society, you see advances in arts and technology and architecture, and yet you also see there's something deeply wrong with our heart. I'll disadvantage you to get me. What's mine? It's a Cain heart, and it's a broken thing, and it's a sad thing. And that's where John goes. So back in our passage. How do you know the seed of the serpent, the children of the devil? And you see it in our passage. Who are the children of the devil? Those who do not do what's right. Those who don't practice righteousness are not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. We should not be like Cain, who murdered his brother. Murder is the opposite of love, let's be clear. And why did he murder him? His own deeds were evil. It's the opposite of righteous, right? And his brothers were righteous. Don't be surprised, brother, when the world hates you. He says, you're gonna see this kind of energy all through the world. This stream keeps flowing. I remember I had a friend in college. She was one of the sweetest girls I'd ever met. So she was so kind that when we would play racquetball together, she could hit the ball harder than me because she'd had training in tennis or whatever, you know? But she would hit the ball so hard, sometimes I could not even physically see it. I would just hear the sound as it went by me. And anytime she did that, she would turn around and go, I'm sorry. And I was like, don't. But she was so kind, it hurt her to dominate me at racquetball. And I remember seeing her after she got a job and she showed up her first day at work and she was so excited to be there. She was praying for her coworkers. She baked them goods. And they would make fun of her for her little goody two-shoes attitude and that she wouldn't dive into some of the things they were doing. And you see, when people feel like they're not right with God, rather than confess and repent, they mock the one who looks like they are. And so here he says, don't be surprised that you're gonna run into Cain energy. It's out there. But notice where this stream ends. Whoever does not love abides in death, right? And whoever hates his brother is a murderer. Now you may say, is that a little strong? Like I hate all kinds of people, but I'm not a murderer. Like murder is worse than hating. And let me just say, it is, okay? You should not murder people, right? Let me just make sure that's clear. But what he's saying is, murder is the ultimate, I disadvantage you for the sake of me. Right? It's the ultimate expression of that. And you go, well, I'm not murdering anybody. But the question is, what stream am I in? You go, I'm not murdering people, but do you disadvantage others for the sake of you? I wouldn't murder anybody, but I mock people online because it makes me feel good. I don't care if it makes them sad. I'll disadvantage them because it helps me. I'll ghost somebody online, right? I know ghosting hurts their feelings, but it makes me feel good to not have to deal with them. So I'll disadvantage you for the sake of me. Hey, I got money, I could give and alleviate human suffering and care for others, but it's my money, or I could spend it on me. So I don't care about you, I'm going for me. That's Cain energy. And you might be further upstream, but this is the stream. Child of the devil, that's the fountain. How does it flow? It looks like Cain, it looks like selfishness, and it ends in death. There's no life over here. Does that make sense? Everybody sad enough? Can we move on to the happy column now? Okay. He moves on over here. Let's go over. So how do you know the children of God? By this it is evident who are the children of God. This is the message you've heard from the beginning. That we should love one another. That sounds way nicer. Verse 14, we know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. We'll get back to verse 16 in a second, but look at verse 18. Little children, let us not love in word and deed and talk, but in deed and truth. So how do you know the children of God? What's the attribute of this family? Love, 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 right? So some of you go, oh, okay, well, that's neat. So you're just saying, oh, it's because we Christians are also loving and y'all are, like y'all think you're better than me? You think you're better people? No. How did you get into this stream? Well, let's look at that for a minute. How do you even get in? This is evidence, not entrance. How do you get in to this stream of child of God? Look at verse 14. We know we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. This is the effect. What's the cause? We have passed, past tense, passive. We got out of death into life. So we were born into death. We were in this stream and somehow we jump stream. So everybody's over here And some clientele got over here. Was it through their effort? No. Look at verse 16. By this, we know love. There was something we saw that showed us what this love is we're supposed to do. He laid down his life for us. That's how we know what love is. Cain's stream is I disadvantage you for the sake of me. And then what's interesting is he doesn't say, and God's stream looks like Abel. He skips Abel. Abel died. Seth replaces him. And then the line goes on down, and you get your genealogy in the New Testament. It goes all the way down to the ultimate seed of the woman, Jesus Christ, the one who came to crush the serpent's head. He said there's two streams here. Seed of the serpent, seed of the woman. Child of God, child of the devil. Looks like Cain, looks like Christ. And where Cain would disadvantage you for the sake of him, what did Christ do? I will disadvantage me even to the point of death for the sake of you. You passed from death into life. How? Because I passed into death to give you life. It's the great exchange. It's the opposite stream. How do you get into this stream? He took our death so we could have his life. It's those who know grace that show grace. It's when love is embraced that it becomes love extended. And you see some of our attributes even over here. He says, no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. This doesn't mean murderers can't be saved or you shouldn't pray for them. Jesus prayed for murderers. But God's love abides in him. What is a believer? It's someone who sees Jesus gave his life for me, and now his life abides in me. Jesus loved me by disadvantaging himself for my benefit, and now that love lives in me. And it's those who know grace that show grace. Do you see it? And it's that presence of love that shows presence of life. John Newton grew up to an irreligious seafaring dad and a religious mom. But his mom died when he was about 6. And his dad started taking him out to work the ships. And his dad was a pretty hard man. John Newton said later, I think my dad loved me, but I think his goal was to never show it. Some of you are like, that just encapsulated my childhood. I'm gonna write that down. That was John Newton. And so he became a cussing sailor. John became a rough kid and was a difficult person. And so that even the other sailors didn't like him. At one point, they were working the west coast of Africa and they just straight up left him on purpose. And he became a slave. And he was so abused and mistreated by his owner, the African slaves in that town felt bad for him and would sneak him food. John was starving to death, he was in trouble, but he was able to escape and get on a boat and survived and got out. And he rose through the ranks and became captain of a ship. And then John, this angry, bitter man, became the captain of a ship that worked the slave trade and bought and sold and separated families and moved people. And there in the midst of that, a storm hit one night in his boat. And for the first time since he's a little kid, he didn't even try to. He just involuntarily shouted out to God for mercy. And that's when it dawned on him, who am I to do that? He survived the storm, but he got seizures. And so they said, you can't be a captain anymore. You can't be out here on the boat. So he lost his job. And he showed up in town having lost everything. But knowing that at the bottom he had cried out involuntarily to God, he stumbled into a church and someone told him the gospel of Jesus Christ, said, God so loves us that while we were sinners, Christ died for us, that he took our death so we could have life. And John Newton, this broken, evil man, put his faith in Jesus and he passed from death into life. And for the rest of his life, he became a pastor who was famous for 3 things. Number 1 was for his tenderness. He was so kind. William Cowper, the great hymn writer, suffered from debilitating depression, and Newton would care for him, moved him into his home. For his tireless work to end the slave trade, that which he used to profit from, he spent the rest of his life undoing. He was the pastor of William Wilberforce, who was able to end the slave trade in Britain without a shot fired. And he was famous for a song he wrote about amazing grace, how sweet the sound, saved a wretch like me. because I was lost. Now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. It was his grace that taught my heart to fear. In his grace, my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. John Newton did not earn his way into this stream. He passed from death to life because of amazing grace that will save a wretch like you and me. And this cruel sailor became a tender pastor, not to earn his place in this stream, not to keep his place in this stream, but as evidence of the life change. It's not by his entrance enter that we love. It is the evidence that we've been loved that we love. And so here you see what is indicative of the children of God. We are born of God. We look like the Son of God who gave his life for us. And so what do? By this we know love. He laid down his life for us. We ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. If Jesus disadvantaged himself for us, we disadvantage ourselves for others. That's how it works, right? You go, Ben, that's great, but what does that look like practically? Well, let's get to the practical part and then we'll close. We ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. What does that look like? Verse 17. If anyone has the world's goods, bios, things that give life, sees his brother in need, and closes his heart, how can God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. How is love evidenced? It's evidenced through our generosity and through our giving. I had a friend who used to say it this way. His pastor used to tell him, how do you know God's moved in someone's life? He said, you see him showing up at church with the good book. Then you see him showing up at church with a notebook. He says, and then you really know God's got their heart when they show up to church with their pocketbook. That's what his pastor used to say. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's kind of a cool way to say it. How do you know God's got your heart? Is when he gets your wallet. That's how you know, right? Now, let me say this. I'm not trying to be mean, but if some of you are like, oh, this is a bait and switch. Now he wants money. All you pastors want money. It's my money. How dare you try to take my money? Where's that energy coming from? What kind of energy is doing that? Why are you angry, Cain? Why is your face fallen? Here's something that helps me, family. We ought to lay down our life for our brothers. What does ought mean? It means that this is a journey and it has some struggle. You got to grow here. So if you're not great at this, there's room for grace, okay? This week, while I was writing this sermon, in my study, in prayer, before the Lord, Donna was like, our neighbor Arnie needs help moving his lawnmower. Will you go help him? And I was like, I don't want to help Arnie. I'm trying to think of an illustration on how to tell these people how they're supposed to help people. How dare you, woman? And then I felt like God's like, gotcha. Yeah. Get up and go help that man move his stuff, right? That this is something God's grace works in us, right? It's a broken part of us that says, I'll disadvantage you for me. You don't want to live like that. Your world gets very small and it ends in death. If Christ disadvantaged himself even to death so we could have life, if he laid down his life for us, we lay down our life for each other. Where is your life found? You probably don't have flocks, but you go, I don't want to let go of my money. This is what keeps me alive. This buys me my things. This feeds me and shelters me, and I can't give this away or else I won't have any, and I have to have it. It'll disadvantage me. And at the root of that is what? Faith. Do I trust him? The child of God says, I trust you. And if you went first and gave all for me, then I want to give all for you. And he says, that's where life is found. There's life at the end of that. I'm not trying to rob you. I'm trying to free you. I'm trying to get you in the flow of what God is up to in the world. I haven't watched Mr. Beast's new show because I don't want to, But some people told me about it. You know, if you're familiar with Mr. Beast, he has a TV show where apparently like you can win millions of dollars, but you got to do some pretty sway-laid stuff. You got to like sell people out for money, and you're like, it's a big morality play. And they said there was one day where there was a big pile of hundreds of thousands of dollars and a handful of contestants left. And they said, we're gonna put you all in separate rooms and let you come out one at a time, and you can take as much of that pile of money as you want. And they all said, you know what? We're gonna be people of character. Let's just split the money evenly. There's many hundreds of thousands of dollars there. We'll each take a fair share. Everyone just take a fifth and we'll be fine. There's 5 of them, like, okay, so the first guy comes, takes his fifth, we're good. Second guy comes, takes all of it. The third one shows up and goes, what? What's the deal? And the second guy was like, I saw 600,000 or whatever, and I needed that money. And so I took that money. And they said at the end, he was weeping because he thought he was a good person. I'm a good person. But when it came down to money, I'll disadvantage you for me. And his money showed where his heart is. And he was weeping because this is not where he wants to be. Schindler's List, if you've ever seen it, it's about a man who was profiting off of World War II. Look at all this war. I can make money by making stuff. But then his heart was broken when he saw Jewish men and women being carted off to concentration camps. Broke his heart. And so he started leveraging the money he made in his factories to rescue Jewish men and women from being sent to concentration camps. He began to employ them in his factories. And he ran this little subterfuge where he was just saving all manner of people, going broke in the process, but using all his money to save people and set them free. And if you've seen the movie at the end, he's found out his business is over, this whole thing is coming to an end, but as it's ending, he's looking around at himself and he said, why did I keep this ring? This could have been 2 more people. Why did I keep this watch? This could have been 10 more people. And you just see he's looking around going, why did I keep any of this? This could have been leveraged for the sake of others. And Ben Kingsley's comforting him, generations will be different because of you. Families will go on for centuries because of you. And yet you see this man dawning, suddenly I realized where life was found is not in disadvantaging others for my advantage, but disadvantaging myself for the sake of others. This is where life is found, that I give my life away so that others may benefit. This is what the believer is meant to do, not just in word or talk, but in deed and truth. Talk is cheap, but we'll know where you are when you put your money where your mouth is. Now, let me close with this. I'm not about to take another offering, okay? Some of you are like, oh man, he's gonna bring them back out again. No, we're not gonna let you give it again today, okay? You're done. And you may not give here, and that's all right. Some of you, and like Elizabeth said, if you're not a believer, don't give here. You're here to assess if you buy any of this. But if you're a follower in Jesus Christ, you say, I'm a child of God, not by my effort, but his grace. And if he gave all for me, I'm gonna give all for the people he loves. And there's a journey to that, but you're meant to live that way. You're meant to meet our brother's needs. Now, there's wisdom to that. Some of you feel guilty and you're gonna throw money out the window of your car to the first person who asks for it. That may not be what they need for food and shelter. And yet we are meant to be a generous people. And I'll talk to some people who say, well, I don't know, if I give to a church, like how do I know they're not misusing it? And you go, well, there are churches that do that. You have to investigate it. But if you've been investigating your entire life and never given, don't use skepticism as a smokescreen for selfishness. Find a church you trust and give there, right? And so if we've just met and you're not sure, don't give anything, we're not taking it off. But if you're a part of this church, can I just tell you as we close where some of your money's going to? We send tutors weekly to the Unique Learning Center to provide academic support and mentorship to students. Some of you mentor on the regular at Don't Go Alone. It's a mentoring program for youth who are aging out of foster care. We host weekly gardening sessions at the Shaw Community Center, cultivating plants and the relationships with the students in our community. We give to Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center, providing the goods and resources they need for mothers and families in need. We fund the coffee and pastries for the coffee chats with the principal of Garrison Elementary School. We host birthday parties at the Community of Hope Triumph Center for kids living in transitional housing. We host dinners all over the city, neighborhood nights every month, so you can find friends in a very lonely age, in a very lonely town. We do core classes so you can learn what it is to know God and learn how to study your Bible. We rent this place so we can worship together. And by we, I don't mean me and the staff. I mean all of us that have said we're the church of Jesus Christ in the city. That some of you, you're in this because you're loving in word and in deed and in truth. I'm leaning into this, and I just want you to know you are a part of what God is doing, and that's a blessed life. And I want that for all of you. And if you're a visitor, you may not give here, but give somewhere. You want to be a part of this stream. Don't give to try to get in. It's not for sale, but once you know grace, show grace. This is where life is found, that he gave all for us, so we give all for them. That's where you'll find true and lasting joy. I promise you.